company is and what's going to happen there and all that. So it's going to be absolutely amazing. So I'm very, very excited about it. And we're going to be talking a lot about it over this upcoming week. So also at 1:30, we are having the Bob that's focused more toward realtors and CPAs and all those people that are having the verticals that can add to us. And Kimberly should be leading that charge today because I'll be on the plane. But thank all of you for being on, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Tim.
Great. Hey, good morning, or good afternoon. Good morning. So there's a lot of things I want to talk about today because this is a big day in a lot of respects. The Federal Reserve Open Market meeting is going on, but before I get to that, one of the things I've talked about a lot in the past has been focused on the tech companies out there. There's been a lot of kind of singular focus in the S&P on those companies that are driving the market. So it's a real narrow group of companies. I think we've kind of gone over this before. So right now the S&P bounced up, and mainly because Nvidia is up. Nvidia is up about 10% today. It just did a huge comeback because the tech has been one of those sectors that there's been some profit taking, and all of a sudden now the computer trading has gone back in, and boom, I think what's happened is a lot of people were pounced back into it. Not all the tech companies are doing well, but when Nvidia does some news announcement or comes out with a new chip design, things like that, you're going to see a big bounce, and that's kind of what we're seeing right now today anyway. The Federal Reserve open market meeting is going on right now. Powell is set to make some comments around 2 o'clock. There's about a 6% chance that the Fed is going to lower interest rates by 25 basis points. So the market doesn't really think that's going to happen. What they do believe is going to happen, as I said before, I think last week, was you're going to see about a 25 basis point decline, a rate adjustment in September. They're calling a 96% chance. So that's already been baked into the prices in the market right now. And so if you kind of so the big guiding thing right now, this is interesting, is what's really driving the Federal Reserve is inflation, and then that's driving the markets, inflation and tech. So when you think about those two dynamics, it's really not the rest of the S&P, which is a broader look at the market than the Dow Jones. The Dow Jones is 30 stocks. I don't know why everybody looks at the Dow. It's kind of funny. But if you look at the broader market, the S&P 500 is a better reading of what's going on. They're up right now 1.5% at 86 points. So you're seeing this big kind of infusion of capital going in, and there's a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines still. You're seeing this huge amount of capital sitting on the sideline that's going back into tech today. And so that's the point I want to make, is when you see those few 7-8 stocks out there that are driving 500 in an index like that shows you what power one sector can have. And this is all about artificial intelligence. And let's face it, AI is going to have a big impact on all of our lives. I mean, I saw an announcement that who was it? Taco Bell is going to have AI at their drive-ups. There's going to have AI in the medical community to be able to detect cancer cells earlier through various tests that they're doing. So AI is going to impact our lives in so many different ways. It's going to impact our business as well. I think we're going to see it impact our underwriting capabilities. It's going to impact our daily lives. But the bottom line is they still haven't found a way to monetize it. So until that happens, I'm still going to call this kind of one of those things like the dot-com times back in 2000, when all of that hype about the internet and the dot-com really took off, and then all of a sudden we had that correction in the market. So I want to talk about a couple inflationary things going on right now. Home insurance is up 21% this year. Okay, let me grasp that for a second. Primarily due to climate change. This is what the insurance companies are saying. So think about the hurricanes that hit, think about the storms, think about the tornadoes, different calamities that hit, various weather conditions, climate change they're calling for. Severe weather basically contributed to many deaths. So you're seeing impact of things, that are having an effect on inflation. We're seeing mixed communication coming from inflation, CPI, and different indicators that the Fed is looking at, CPE and CPI. These are all different things that they monitor. One's saying 2.5, the other one's saying 3.2, and really we're still around 3%. And me personally, I don't think inflation is going to go down that much, just because there's so many other things that are impacting inflation. One of it is fuel. Fuel bounced back up. The Brent is over $80 today. It sank back down below 80. It got crushed recently just because they discounted everything in the Middle East. Now, one of the Hamas leaders was assassinated in Tehran, and now Tehran is, Iran is telling Israel that you're going to pay for this and they're going to come after you. So that's causing more unrest in the Middle East. The war in Ukraine is still going on now for over 3 years. So, you got this geopolitical kind of mess. Then the thing down in Venezuela, which we all, some of you are probably watching, that's kind of a mess going on down there as well. So we'll see what happens with inflation as we watch this, but I don't think it's going down to the Fed's level. Now, there's a political implication here that, I really don't care what your political your political side is, but what's happening is I think the Federal Reserve is probably going to lower rates by 25 basis points at least once before the election this year in November, maybe twice. So you've got that kind of going on behind the scenes. So today we don't expect anything from the Federal Reserve, but I think you're going to see some language coming out of Chair Powell's mouth that indicates that September they're going to lower rates. That's if everything falls in line with their talk. Now, what I'd like to do, let me just touch on a couple other things. This is kind of one of those reminders that unemployment has remained low, but looking deeper into the economy, what's really going on today, 54% of Americans now say they have a side hustle of some sort. They make a little extra money on the side over their regular full-time job. 66% of Americans say that they're living paycheck to paycheck. Gen Zs, Gen Zers, are more likely to have a side gig, side hustle, than any other generation. They say that right now, those polled, 71% say that they have some kind of a side gig or they're looking for one. And inflation, just so you get your arms around where the gap is, inflation hit a high of 9.1%, okay, back in 2022. Obviously, it's come down now. At the same time, Social Security COLA, which is cost of living increase, was actually propped up to 5.3%. So when you look at that, and then the actual wage growth was right around 5%. So that's what's causing what I call an inflation gap, and that's what we're seeing in the market. That's what you can have conversations with people about. Is there this inflationary gap is causing pressure on people to look for other sources of income, because the income they have right now isn't paying for the food, the gas, the basics that they have to survive on. So they're looking for other opportunities. And this is interesting. The baby boomers, which make up 76 million of Americans right now, 1/3 of them are either looking for a side hustle, a second income, or have already found one. You know, I mean, the greeters at Walmart or McDonald's. You know, I mean, these are good targets for us. These are people that they're educated, they're pretty smart. I mean, these are people that are influencers almost, you know. So I want you to think about that. And you've got in the backdrop of all this, you got mounting credit debt, you've got US debt, you've got cost of living, you know, not enough income as I'm pointing out, rising medical costs, housing costs, you know, more people are renting today. Rising insurance, you know, that we just said, house insurance, home insurance up 21%. Fuel and car costs are also contributing to inflation. So you got all these factors going on, which makes it a really prime spot for all of us. Kimberly, can I take over the screen for a second? I want to show you
Yeah,
also.
1 second. Let me make you co-host.
Okay.
And one thing, Tim, I wanted to mention also was that on that talking about the younger crowd, you know, this when we used to talk about the Great Resignation that took place a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
They have the Great Resignation 2.0 that's getting ready to happen, and I think they said 1 in 3 of that group, the younger millennial and Gen Z, were going to leave their job, not just get side hustles, but they're wanting to leave their job.
Yeah, and a lot of those are still living in the basement of mom and dad.
That's true.
Do I have?
Yeah, you're co-host now.
Okay, so I can share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Oh, I don't want that. I want that. All right. Can you see that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is something I did a little research on. This is very interesting. I don't know if you read some of my daily market commentary, but so the U.S. Treasury inverted curve has been accurately forecasting a recession since 1950. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Right? Can you see it? I can make it larger if you can't. So the inversion is measured between the 10-year and the 3-month Treasury. So under a normal economy, what happens is a 3-month Treasury bill would normally pay a lower interest rate as compared to a 10-year Treasury. You can kind of see this right up here where I'm talking about this, because there's greater risk and you're tying up your money to hold a bond, a Treasury, a US Treasury for 10 years, right? So you're going to get more interest. I mean, that's the way it's designed, is that's a normal curve, interest rate curve on the Treasury yields. And what we're seeing is an inverted curve right now that's been around for now for 22 months. Okay, so let's look at, and this is an accurate forecasting system that's been around since 1950. So if you go back to 1968, the inverted yield curve lasted 12 months, and afterwards there was a recession started in December 69 that the market, the S&P, was down 36% from peak to trough. In June 73, the inverted curve lasted 5 months. If you follow this, you can kind of see where I'm going with this. So here we are, you know, this is 8 times this has happened in the past, and now we're in the current one where actually it's 21 months going on 22. This is the longest inverted curve that we've had between the 10-year and the 3-month Treasury. Okay, so knowing that, and here's the median here, if you see it right there, it's 35% is the median average recession peak to trough decline. So the S&P 500 currently trading, and I just put this in here this morning, is trading right around 55.16. So it's up about 80 points today, 87 actually currently right now. And it's 97.3% of its high. So you can't time markets. You cannot time markets, and we all know that. This is why an IUL or an index annuity is such a powerful tool. This is a great example. I'm going to send this to Kimberly and Jody just so you can, and I'll put a disclaimer on here that, this is information to be shared, for, just for educational purposes. And, you can't predict the future and that kind of things. But this gives you a pretty good indication that this is why you want to use a product like an IUL and an index annuity. Is we can't forecast when this is going to happen, but you can protect the downside. You can participate in the upside, but if you can stop the losses, this is a perfect example of how you can help people retire with peace of mind and more safety. So I just wanted to share that. I'm going to turn that back to Jody. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, Tim, I was just going to say, I'll let you comment on this too, and Kimberly and Zach. I don't think some of these guys that are new to the business understand just how important it is to have a floor when somebody's in retirement phase. I mean, when somebody's over 55 or even past 50, it is catastrophic for them to have a big downturn. I mean, it's bigger than we really even, this might be a perfect chance just to put an exclamation point on that, because, you all of a sudden have somebody go to retire and they have a negative 50 in the market. They don't have time for it to come back. Just kind of comment on that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Kimberly and Zach have commented on this before, is when you get to that 50 age, where, one of the things I always like to say too, Jody, is when you're talking to people, when you're mapping out your kind of retirement conversation, when are you going to retire? I think the point we all want to try to motivate people is start planning your retirement as early as you can, because, you work most of your life, you raise a family, you do all these things. And, as we get older, health insurance and the possibility of having medical problems is a real issue. And so, you don't know how long you're going to be here, and you want to take advantage of all that time you've done and work that you've done for all your life. And you want to start enjoying, the time that you've spent, and you want to be able to take that money that you've had, and you want to protect it, and you want to be able to use it to retire with. And this is why, why we use products like we have. Jody's this is a great point, that who knows what's going to happen, but if we can protect the bottom, we can protect the losses, and protects people's future this way. This is a powerful tool.
And also, the last thing I'll say is that the peace of mind that provides. Think about that. Somebody can go into those years literally never having to think about that again. That's a huge thing. I mean, it's just I've heard all these advertisements where you're talking about peace of mind, but obviously the older I get, the more I think about it, and it's just, it really is. Those products provide that peace of mind. So, Kimberly, back over to you.
And real quick, before I cut out of here, I wanted to point out something. Look at this right here, because back in this time frame, the market was down over 50%. Over here, it was down almost 50%. And by the way, we're now this time we have an inversion over 1%, which has only happened one time, and we're at 21 months going on 22 months. That this is the longest inversion period we've ever had. So what that's indicating with interest rates being so low for so long is this could be a pretty sharp decline. I'm not calling it that way, but I'm saying the possibilities there. So that's the message I just want to say to you all is, look, I call this insider information here. You have insider information of what could possibly happen and how to protect people. It's a powerful, powerful thing. So back to you, Kimberly.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it very much. And it is definitely a powerful thing and something very important to think about, to understand, to know, especially right now, right? Especially with the potential for a pretty big recession. I talked to Paul Dietrich the other day, and had a conversation with him about what he sees in the market. And, he says exactly the same thing. I know he's speaking at our conference in Vegas, and I can't wait to hear him, and I can't wait for you guys to hear him. Couple of things that he usually says is, obviously, as Tim said, we can protect our clients right now, right? We have the tools to do so with the indexed accounts, the guaranteed floors, and there's no risk to volatility if they're at that point in their retirement. But it also is a big opportunity for you guys as advisors, because advisors notoriously are going to try to tame the market, or time the market, right? Like they're going to try to continue to get the returns that they've been getting, and at some point it's not going to be fun. It's going to be painful. When that happens, there will be clients that are looking for new advisors. So make sure that you're talking about safety and protection, and and being defensive right now, because we all should be defensive right now in our investing, right? Because that's just, we know, everyone says, not just us, everyone says the market's overvalued, but we continue to ride the wave because it's a wave, right? So be aware of that. The other thing that I'll mention is, from 2008 to 2018 almost, we called it the lost decade. Why? That's because when we lost that money in the market at that point in time, it took us 10 years or more to get back to where we started. And that means, remember our concept of, when does 50% cost you 100%? Until you get back to even, you don't start moving forward again. So what if I was 60 in 2008 and I was ready, right? I'm retiring, I'm so excited, or 65, right? But I'm right there at that moment where I've worked my entire life to live out my visions and my dreams in retirement. And then we had that big recession, right? We dropped 57%, like Tim just showed us, and we wrote it down. And then what if we had to wait 10 years just to get back to where we were, right? Not to go forward, just to get back to where we were. Do you really want to work until you're 75 or until you're 80 because you made a bad decision at the end of your retirement? No. So maybe when you're young, the market makes sense. And I'm not saying the market never makes sense when you're older, but I definitely believe, and you guys on my team, you hear me say it all the time, let's guarantee the income that you have to have. And then everything else, we can do whatever we want to with it, right? But if we can guarantee your income, and worst case scenario, recession, stock market crashes, crazy economies, everything, worst case scenario, what your guaranteed monthly income is for life, then I don't care what you do with the rest of your money, right? Ideally, we'll make more of it, but you could spend it all, right? Take a trip around the world, or 10. It doesn't really matter, because you know that your bases are covered. So remember that, and remember how powerful indexing is, because both our IULs and our annuities use that platform and use that method to invest and to protect your money. So the floor is a really big deal. Do you want to say anything else, Tim, before I switch over?
Nope, it's all yours. I'm going to bow out. I got to run to another meeting, but thank you
Okay.
all. Have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to pick up now where we left off last week. I think it's a perfect segue. We're talking about indexing. Remember last week we shared just the first part of that North American video that was explaining how IULs worked. And conceptually, it's also how indexed annuities work. So remember that when you're listening to this, it's not just IULs, it's generally indexes, right? So I'm going to share this. We're going to pick up talking about rates and some of the crediting methods. And again, this isn't designed for you guys to understand everything and for you guys to know everything. But the more you hear terms like this, and the more you wrap your head around terms like this, the more you will understand. And when a client asks you, you can sound semi-intelligent, right? To answer their questions. And one day you'll be an expert. You'll be fully intelligent. All right, so let me find my beautiful little video. Here we are. And here we go. I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to get started on this. Okay. We'll make it big. And we'll start.
So when I say different rates, what do I mean by different rates? Well, there's an index participation rate. There's an index cap rate. There's an index spread rate, and there's an index floor rate. So we're going to spend a good deal of time here. And if you already understand IUL, hey, patience for the rest of us who don't fully get it yet, but we're going to go through this methodically so that you really understand what a participation rate, what a cap rate is, what a spread rate is, and what a floor rate is. And those of you who already do have a pretty good understanding of IUL, hey, maybe there's little bits in here, maybe ways I approach this that can help you, give you some tools to explain it to clients. So let's start with the index participation rate, or sometimes it's called a par rate. In fact, oftentimes it's called a par rate. This is the percentage of the index change that is used to calculate a credit. So, for example, if the participation rate is 100%, they're going to get 100% of the index change. If a participation rate is 50%, then they're going to get 50% of what the index change is. So if the index went up 10% and they have a 50% par rate, they're going to get 50% of 10. Now, sometimes participation rates can be over 100. You could have 120, 150% participation rate. So if, for example, you had a 150% participation rate and the index went up 5, then they would get 150% of 5, which is 7.5. So we're going to go through some examples of this, but the participation rate is declared in advance of each segment period. The participation rate can change. It's not locked in for the life of the policy. It can change. But once an index segment starts, it can't change during that segment period. So once you start a 1-year measuring period for an index segment or chunk of money, then it will kind of go through and do that in advance as well. And I'm sure we'll have questions. There's a decent chance. In fact, I saw someone else already kind of raised a hand. There's likely that I'm probably going to answer your question by the time we get to the end. But I will save room at the end for additional questions. I'm just not going to kind of interject through as we're going. But if you'd like, you can certainly use the question and answer section and address questions and save them in there, and we'll address them at the end for those who are attending live. If you're watching the recording, good reason to attend live on the next one. But this is index participation rate. Let's go through an example of participation rates. Now I've got purely hypothetical. These index products that I'm talking about don't exist. This is just to explain the theory of how it works. And I get it. Some of you are going, whoa, wait a minute, Tom. I see some of your things going down. I thought there was a floor. I know. I'm going to talk about floor later. Right now, I'm only talking about participation rate. We're ignoring floors at the moment. So the green represents the underlying market that is used to measure the performance. The blue represents our theoretical policy with a participation rate or a par rate of 80%. So let's say the index goes up 8%. With the participation rate of 80%, you're going to get 80% of 8, 6.4. Boy, I'm going to have to use a calculator for some of these numbers, or I'll see if I can do quick math. So it's a little bit less than the 8%. How about if the index goes up 17%? 80% of 17 is 13.6, I think. So they will get 80% of 17%. Now, again, ignoring floor rates, I'm just talking about participation rates here. If the index goes down 21%, they get 80% of the downward movement. Again, we'll get past that in a minute. Again, the next year they'll get 80%. And then in that final year, the index goes up 34%. If the participation rate was 80%, they would get 80% of that 34 as well. That's how participation rates work. Some indexes have participation rates at 100%, and are locked in at 100. Some indexes have a participation rate below 100%, and that par rate will change. Other indexes have a participation rate over 100%, and that par rate may change. On the next session that we talk about, I'll explain why these participation rates are set where they are, why they change, how companies can afford to do this. That's the next session. Right now, we're just talking about terminology. So one of the rates that we're talking about is our participation rate, and this is what a participation rate does. Now, let's talk about another rate, another term called an index cap rate. A cap is the maximum index credit percentage that they can receive. So a cap rate may be, for example, 8%. It could be 10%. It could be 12%. There are some indexes that don't have a cap at all. But the cap rate is that maximum amount that they can get. Again, just like participation rate, this is declared in advance for each index measuring period or each chunk of money. This is declared in advance and it can't change on them halfway through. So if we say, hey, the cap rate for you for this premium that you're putting in for that next measuring period, that next year, if the cap rate is 10, cap rate does not change during that year. Now, future premiums you put in, it may change, but it won't change once you start the index segment. And again, some index selections have no cap at all. Let's go through some examples of a cap rate with that same kind of a graphic and market performance. Again, the green is the index performance, and the blue is the index cap rate. So if we look at the index performance, let's say that the index goes up 8% and we have a cap of 10. Every year we'll have to look and say, okay, is that 8% within our 10% cap? Yes, it is. Okay, we're good. Then they get the whole 8%. How about if the index goes up 17%? Oh, wait a minute. Our cap is 10. So the most that they can get is 10. Even though the index went up 17, they get 10. I think a lot of people are going to be pretty pleased with a 10% rate of return compared to what they would get in a fixed universal life. Again, ignoring floors at the moment, the index goes down 22%. Is that within our 10% cap? Yeah, it is. If it goes down 16%, is that within our positive 10% cap? Yeah, it is. And then in the last year, the index kind of has this rebound year, goes up 34%. We have a 10% cap, so it goes up 10%. That's how a cap works. Okay. Let's go to a spread rate. This one isn't a term that's not heard as often, so I'll try to be just a little bit more methodical on this one. A spread rate is the difference between the index growth rate and the crediting rate that they're going to apply. So for example, a spread would say, we're going to take this much off the top. So a spread might be 3%. If the index goes up 5, we'll take 3% off the top and they'll get 2. Now, a 3% spread is very low. That's not a very reasonable spread. Usually they're more like, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11%, somewhere in that, range. So let's use an 8% example. If the index goes up 12, the spread is 8%, they'll get 4. If the index goes up 20, the spread might be 8%, they'll get 12. What happens if the spread is 8 and the index earns 7? Well, effectively then the spread will eat up all of the earnings and they would receive 0 or -1 if you did not have a floor, which we'll talk about floors in a little bit. So that's what a spread rate is. Just like cap and par rates, they are declared in advance and can't change on you midway through. And again, some index selections have no cap. Oftentimes, if they have a spread index, related index that uses a spread rate, usually those have no cap at all. That's why I use the example of like a 25% return and an 8% spread. You would get a positive 17%. So the potential on indexes that have a spread rate, the upside potential is oftentimes very large, because generally those indexes with a spread rate don't have a cap. And so there's been some really good potential returns or actual returns on policies that have indexed spread rates because without a cap, they can do very well in big years. The spread will not result in a credit below the floor rate. Again, we'll talk about floor rates in a little bit more detail in just a minute, but the spread will not give you a negative return. So let's look at these examples again. Now in this example, we've got a spread rate of 10%. So if the index goes up 15, then they would take 15 minus 10, they would get a 5% credit. If the index goes up 17%, you would take 17 minus 10, you would get a positive 7% credit. Likewise, if the indexes go down, you would take your spread, it's basically a 22 would become a negative 32. Again, not going to be applicable with floors. The minus 16 would become a minus 26. And then this big bounce back year, this is where spread works really well because you can actually participate in a significant amount of that bounce back year. So if it gets a 34% return with a 10% spread, you basically take 10% off that 34 and you get a 24% index credit in that particular year. So that's how a spread works. Now, all of these different terms really work together with a floor rate. The floor rate is going to be applied to all of these index options. And a floor rate is really handy because what a floor does is it sets a minimum floor rate where that's the minimum amount of return that you can get to calculate an index credit. Just like all the others, if the floor rate is variable, if it moves, it will be declared in advance on each index segment period and can move. Generally, we have indexed universal life policies. I haven't seen one yet where there's a floor below 0. So all of these indexed universal life policies have a floor of 0 or higher. We may have index selections that may have floors higher than 0%. But they're going to be at least a 0% rate of return. And a 0% floor means in a down market, they can't get a negative interest rate credit. So that's the real difference and maker and something that appeals to people with indexed universal life. It's the potential of index linked returns, the potential of returns higher than a fixed policy might get, but with the protection that they're not going to get a downside return if the underlying index does a negative return. So that's what kind of puts indexed universal life in that sweet spot between fixed UL, where you have a known return, but it's known to be low, variable UL, where you have the potential for really good returns, but you have the potential for significant losses, and indexed universal life fits that sweet spot in between, gives you the potential for higher returns, but with the protection of not losing or getting negative credits or negative returns when the underlying index goes negative. So let's look at another example. Again, I'm going to ignore cap, par, and spread rates at this point and just look at the floor. So if we just looked at floor, and this would be an example of too good to be true, you have to have some way to pay for this, but wouldn't this be great if you only got the upside of an index? So the underlying market index goes up 8, you get the whole 8. The index goes up 17, you get the whole 17. When it goes down 22%, you don't get any of that and you just stay where you are. When it goes down 16%, you don't get any of that down 16, you stay where you are. And then when it goes up that 34%, you get the whole 34. Wow, that would be amazing if you could have this type of design with just a floor rate and no other cap, par, or spread rates. Alas, that is too good to be true. That does not exist. There's going to be some different way to pay for it. Again, in that next session, I will detail how we pay for this and how this works and how companies can afford to do it. But there's going to be some other element to it. This just kind of shows the floor rate, and it's kind of a ratcheting design that says, okay, look, You know, the nice thing is you can go up, but you never go down, and you can keep going up. Now, of course, there's still policy charges. You can't say that a policy can never lose money because there's still cost of insurance, mortality, you know, premium loads, policy fees. There's other policy charges, but the index crediting in this example, ignoring policy charges, would not go down. So let's put all of these together into a theoretical, like I said, this one does not exist, but a theoretical index design, putting all of these together. Now, in this example, we have a participation rate of 80%, a cap rate of 10%, and a floor rate of 0%. So participation rate 80%, cap rate 10, floor of 0. Now, if the underlying index goes up 8%, then what do you get? You get 80% of that 8. And again, this doesn't often happen that you have caps and participation rates together. That's why this is very theoretical. But is that 80% of 8, 6.4% within our 10% cap? Yeah, it is. Then the index goes up 17% the next year. You get 80% of 17. Didn't I do that? Let's see, 17 times 0.8. What was it? 13.6. Is the 13.6 within our 10% cap? Nope, it's not. Then you only get 10%. So then it goes up that. But look at the beauty of what this design does when the underlying index goes down. When it goes down 22, you don't get any of that downward movement. When it goes down 16, you don't get any of that downward movement. And when the market has its big kind of comeback year and try to recover from the previous 2 years of struggles, it goes up 34%. You don't get the whole 34%. You get within that participation and cap rate of 34. 80% of 34 is still well over 10. So effectively, we're getting 10% in that year as well. This is how Indexed Universal Life really works. This is the design that makes it so appealing that you can get some of these nice credits, even though they're not the full returns of an underlying index, but they're a portion of those returns. It's that downside protection that makes it so appealing, and that ratcheting design. We're not starting from down here or when the market goes way down here, we're not starting from here on that 34%. We're starting from up here because we had that floor. And that's the design that makes this so appealing. So let's look at a couple other things here. Index buckets and crediting methods. And index buckets are just a kind of a term I'm using. More technical term is index segments, but I'm going to kind of talk about it as a bucket for right now, because that kind of gives you a little bit better idea of the visual of that. So we're going to talk about index buckets and crediting methods. So basically, when they're putting their money into a life insurance policy, they're putting their policy into a bucket, or what's technically an index segment.
All right, hold on a second. I'm gonna pause this for a second. Because we still have maybe 20 minutes of that video and of that explanation. And we don't have 20 minutes left today. Some of you are probably like snoring and bored out of your mind. And some of you are like, wait, tell me again. So remember that we live stream to YouTube. And so you guys should have that. You should subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow it. That way you can, go back and watch it. Because if you're new to this world, if you're new to those terms and just the concepts, you might want to watch it again, right? Just to understand it. But again, the more you hear it, the more you watch things like that, the more you are going to understand. But I think I'll save the index buckets and crediting methods for next week, so you can kind of take one section at a time and understand it, so you just don't get too overwhelmed. Do you guys have any questions on what you've seen so far? And I will switch it to gallery view so you guys can see each other. Maybe you can already see each other, but do you guys have any questions on how that works? I do want you to hear me when I say that is not North American specific. I know it's a North American webinar that we're kind of dissecting and taking in pieces, but all index universal lives, all indexed annuities have rates and caps and pars and things like that. You'll have to read your actual product to see what it has. But when you're deciding, okay, I sold an IUL, I sold an indexed annuity, like they get it, they understand. And my team, we talk about big bubble pictures, right? Like we get the big picture of what this is. Now we start getting inside, okay, I sold it. They get the concept, they like it. Where do I actually put their money, right? And that's where it gets a little more complicated, talking about participation rate spreads, all this kind of stuff, index crediting methods, all of those different things that you will learn. And again, we teach via field training, right? So you're going to have someone that's experienced with you in the field, educating your client, and you're learning at the same time. So don't get overwhelmed. Don't be terrified that you don't know what you're doing, because somebody will be with you until you do. But any questions that you guys have at this moment? Are you all experts?
No,
I
that's
hope
what
you are.
that's the only thing that I'm curious about are on the products that we typically sell, the specific IULs. What are those, caps and crediting methods and things of that nature?
Yep, great question. So let me, I will log into North American really quick, just because it's quick and I know where it is. But when you log into, each carrier will provide that, and each carrier will show you where that is and what that looks like. And it changes, right, year to year. And it changes based on product. So Gail, we've talked, and Mary Kay and I have talked, and maybe a handful of other people on our team specifically about, crediting methods and when you put your money in. And you guys know now, just in the world around us, like savings accounts are paying more, right? Our CDs are paying more. All of those fixed accounts are paying more. That means that when you put money into an annuity today, those fixed accounts are paying more than if I put it in last year at the same time, right? But the annuities that I sold last year will always have lower fixed account buckets, right? Than the annuities that I sell this year, even on the next year's crediting method, because it's based on the market at that time, right? And I don't know all the technical terms behind it, but they go out and they buy options and puts and calls and things like that based on the market at that time. And that's what those products are designed on. So every year that's going to change. And every year it depends on the actual product that you were in. Mary Kay, do you have something you want to say while I pull this up?
Does that typically change on your anniversary date, Kimberly?
Good question. So you will get an annual statement, whether it's an IUL or an indexed annuity. You'll get your annual statement. And typically, like I've got one right here somewhere, make sure you're signed up for notifications. And if not, when you have a policy issue, just put a calendar reminder in your phone. Hey, it's Jade's, policy anniversary for her IUL on July 31st, and put it in as a recurring thing, right? Because typically you have 30 days. And I don't remember if it's before or after, but it's right around, I guess it would probably have to be after, because then you'd see what your actual credit is. But you've got 30 days, and you should get a letter that you can change that before it goes into effect for the next year. So typically those crediting methods, and he'll talk about that when we watch the next section of that, are a lot of them are annual, right? Annual point to point on the S&P or something like that, right? Which means that if I put money in today, July 31st today, then they're going to look at July 31st next year, and they're going to look at the point to point, right? And see the difference of growth or loss between the S&P from July 31st to July 31st, period. As simple as that gets, right? That would be annual. Some of them are biannual. So some of them reset every 2 years, depending on what you choose. That's when you would make those changes, because other than moving from the fixed account, you can't move back and forth. You can't say, oh, I think the S&P is going to have a great month, and stick it in there, and then go, oh, I think it's going to be horrible this month, and pull it out, right? It is because you have those floors and you have that protection. you can only make that decision at the end of your crediting term, typically annually, but sometimes biannually. So let me show you back here. So this is, and sometimes I have to kind of poke around to see. So this is North American. And let's look at, I'm going to click in here and just see if it's under the Builder Plus, but yeah, so you can see here on the left, current IUL cap and par rates on the left. So you can click on that and it's going to tell you on this particular product based on now, the current caps and par rates on the Builder Plus IUL. And actually this is their whole portfolio. So it will tell you, like if I zoom in, you know, it's going to tell you here, right? Like index participation rate. It'll tell you cap rate if there's a cap rate, right? And again, you can see if it's annual point to point or if it's biannual, the different products are the names at the top. So that will tell you there. I also like to, sometimes I like to look at like current IUL rates, right? What has it done? Which one should I choose? And it think I don't know if these look like I want to see their actual performance, but somewhere in here, maybe sales and marketing. As I click through. Anyway, I'm not gonna click through while you guys just watch me kind of scroll through, but somewhere in there, there are, you know, what it did last year, right? From this point to this point, you can kind of see what the rates are and make an educated decision. And again, you don't have to know all of this right now, whoever your field trainer is. That's why we do field training, right? That's why we have that spread. That's why we split cases sometimes, because you are using and learning from the knowledge of somebody else that's already learned it, right? And they're teaching you instead of you having to stumble forward, stay confused, right? You can do that, but somebody can hold your hand along the way. So, but it's all back there. Yeah, Mary Kay.
Hey, on a couple of those, on that one screen where it was showing the rates, you know, it had the participation rate and then it had a cap rate and it said none. So that means, like, let's say for instance, the market goes up 20% or whatever, they're not capping you at 10 or is that, do I understand that cap rate correctly?
Correct. So you need to take each piece individually. So for example, let me share this piece just really quickly. And let's look at this Builder Plus IUL at the end, right? The last one, right? So if we're in the Fidelity Multi-Factor Yield Index inside of North American and we're doing the annual point to point, then I have 120% participation rate. I don't have a cap and I don't have a spread. So I'm going to participate at 120%. If I am in the annual point-to-point S&P, I've got 100% participation rate, which means all of my money is participating, and I can make 9.5% in that account. So if the S&P returns 9.5%, I get 100% of 9.5%. If the S&P returns 15%, I get 9.5%. If the S&P returns 5%, I get 5% because it's still within that 9.5. If the S&P returns negative 5%, I get 0. Make sense? I can't see you, so I don't know if you're shaking your head or not.
Yeah, yeah, I was nodding my head, but I was muted.
I was like, she must be nodding her head because she's not speaking to me.
Sorry.
So that's how that works. So just, you know, again, this business is like a mouse eating an elephant, right? Which is why you have field trainers, which is why you have people holding your hand and teaching you every step of the way until you are comfortable doing it on your own. The more of these calls that you're on, the more really you can be on these calls all day long and you will learn something, I promise, but you're going to learn the most in field training and live action always, every single time, because then it's applicable, right? Then you're listening to a client ask these questions, you're watching the whole process go together. It's your commission. You're like, I gotta get paid. Let's close this baby. What do we gotta do? Right? So it matters more than just learning things conceptually, but learning things conceptually will help you too. So if you guys don't have any other questions, then I'll blow you kisses for the day, and we'll bite off another chunk next week. But every carrier, hear me when I say that, every carrier will show you participation rates, cap rates, the historic, not the historical rates, but what the rates have actually done, like what those different indexes have actually done on that specific product. So you can kind of go back through and look at it if you choose to do so.
Kimberly, you're doing a BOP in 30 minutes.
Apparently,
Is that today?
Apparently I'm doing a bot. I'm just kidding. I'm doing a bot. Jody's flying today, so I am doing the 1:30 call. And the 1:30 call is geared towards people in our industry, whether they're other financial professionals, CPAs, property and casualty insurance agents, real estate agents, mortgage brokers, regardless of who they are. The intention and the kind of focus of our conversation at 1:30 is on industry professionals. So join us, same Zoom.
Thanks. Bye.
All right, we'll see